Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Index podcast and webinar. My name is Matt Phelan, and I'm here with Jan-Emmanuel De Neve, but we can call him Jan because only his mum calls him Jan-Emmanuel. So, how are you doing, Jan?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I've got so many questions that I want to ask you, but in your words, how would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Somebody who's hopefully kind and generous and a decent bloke. That's how I would like to introduce myself. But more formally, probably be Professor of Economics and Behavioural Science at the University of Oxford, based at the Saïd Business School, and fellow at one of the Oxford colleges, where I set up the Wellbeing Research Centre back in 2019, which is now a group of, roughly speaking, about 20 researchers on the empirical science of well-being, including a big stream on workplace well-being, which I know, Matt, is obviously your area of expertise and practice as well. But we also work on things like child and adolescent well-being in the context of schools, or are now also the publishing hub of the World Happiness Report, which obviously takes and looks at population well-being and tries to understand differences around the world. So there's a lot of ways that we can take this conversation as a result.
There is, and there's so much stuff. Like if people are watching, I've got one of Jan's book here, policy. I've got why work and workplace wellbeing matters, and you've just also mentioned the World Happiness Report. Firstly, I think this is credit to we like yourself and Richard Layard. People are taking the subject more seriously now, which is great. And I'm also seeing more people want to work in this area, which I think is brilliant. They're seeing this as a career opportunity. But when lots of people hear something like University of Oxford, that can be intimidating to someone who's not from University of Oxford, because we think, oh, wow, you think of the ivory towers, this is hard to access this area. How did you get into a career like this? Because where did you even start, like thinking about that this stuff was important, Jan?
Oh God, that's such a good question. I'll try and do it justice in very little time. I think it's because, well, one, every academic has chosen the subject or the area of expertise for a number of reasons, typically personal. In my case, I've always been, from way back, the kind of guy who wants to see other people happy. I think that's truly deeply what it is, and I've only come to this realization quite late. And I actually want to work for the United Nations, and in particular, the peacekeeping conflict resolution teams. Yeah. And I think that's deep down. I've always cared very, very, very much about the well-being of others. Now, obviously, in academia, you're going to have to pick your areas and your levels of expertise. But ultimately, in a big project back in 2009, 2010, we're looking at a data set, and there was a survey item that was, how satisfied are you with your life these days? Right. And that real moment, I remember it quite vividly. It was a eureka moment for me. It's like, wait a second, that is the question, isn't it? All the others are sort of just drivers of or inputs into how you rate the quality of your lives as you experience it. And that opened up a whole new world for me, went down a rabbit hole, and got to know Lord Richard Layard, senior professor at the LSE, where I was doing my PhD at the time. And I got introduced to a whole world of sort of visionary, revolutionary senior economists who were starting to put this economics of well-being, leveraging that particular item around life satisfaction, so that their workhorse item, and leveraging that for policy, insights in labor economics, insights in terms of the importance of work for general well-being. And I haven't looked back. So that's been my entry into the field, really. And then we're talking 2009, 2010. And so we're now 15 years on. And here we are with a book with Richard and Charles.
Can you just repeat what that question was that you said you read in that report? What was the exact question?
Yeah. The exact question was the life satisfaction question. So it would have been, for anybody listening in, on a scale from 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life these days? Yeah. And that it's as you know, Matt, it's a life evaluation. So it's evaluative, it's not affective, nor is it eudaimonic. But it's sort of a basic question that captures holistically how your life is going from your perspective, the way you think your life is going, which is ultimately what matters. And I remember vividly that question sort of hit home to me, as everything else we do in life tends to feed into our quality of life as we experience it. And so that became, to me, that's the ultimate KPI. And then obviously job satisfaction, which we might get to talk about, is a domain of life satisfaction, if you will, just like marital satisfaction or school environment satisfaction for kids are sort of elements of satisfaction with domains of life, but ultimately life satisfaction is where it all comes together.
So Jan, I believe in anonymous surveys, but I'm going to ask you a non-anonymous survey, and I'm going to ask you, how satisfied are you on that scale, yourself in life? Which I know is a very personal question to ask someone.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, and it's funny because it's sort of for me, I know the average answers, of course, and so I might be a bit biased because I know, but I think at this moment, definitely a good 8.
Yeah.
Possibly actually a 9. Now, obviously, these things move a bit in function of. So, had you asked me 2 months ago, probably said a 6 or a 7. But at this very moment, probably an 8 or a 9. Certainly.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't have you on and not ask you that question. So this is a similar question, but for the future you, the you now. Why 15 years later are you still working on this subject? Because you went down the rabbit hole, you were captivated. Why are you still working on it?
That is such a good question, Matt. For one, because I was passionate. That eureka moment to me opened up a world that felt like it was perfectly aligned with who I was. Back to the origin story.
Yeah.
Wanting to study what makes people feel good about life and avoids misery. Because just to be clear, and it's important, I think, and I think you're in the similar spirit. While it's called the Happiness Index or the World Happiness Report or Wellbeing, I know it has a positive spin to it. But we're not in the business of trying to make people who are 9 out of 10 a 10 out of 10. We're really focused on people who are 3, 4, 5s and turning them to 6, 7, and 8s. That's where the real bang for your buck is. That's where the real. So, but obviously we don't want to call it the avoiding misery index or something like that. And so, but I think so we should. And Richard Laird is really good at this. So everybody's equal, of course. But I think from a policy perspective, within corporates or within governments, there's probably something to be said for putting more of a weight on people who are unhappy, trying to raise them, than people who are very happy, trying to raise them even further. So that's important, I think, to capture. But back to your question of why I stuck with it. One, passion. This was definitely it. Now, obviously, this path dependency, once you really go down the rabbit hole, it's hard to climb back out because in academia, you have to become an expert on something, particularly you can't sort of move away all that quickly. But I think there's another reason too. Because early on in my PhD, I was doing other stuff, median voter theorem, comparative political economy. Yeah. And there's something that was very different when studying well-being. And I think it goes to the point you raised earlier on people increasingly understanding there's a career in this and it resonates and is doing good while doing well type of thing, which is the old stuff I was doing on political economy, international relations. It just didn't resonate with people. I were to raise at the table with my grandma, 30 seconds later we'll be on to something else. Yeah. But talk about how people feel in life and what drives it and what the impact of that is behaviorally and otherwise. It resonates with people. Half an hour later, not 30 seconds later, you're still in the topic. Yeah. And so I felt also not just an alignment with how I feel and what I'm hoping to do in life, so the positive social impact with what I was studying and researching, but also it resonated with people, which that sort of motivates you even more. And I think so that's an important bit. And then it just doesn't just resonate with people, but also with organizations, with policymakers and the media. And so that became sort of a positive, virtuous cycle where then our research led to positive impact, resonance, and that then led to more resources and more enthusiasm to do even more of it. And the World Happiness Report is obviously an amazing example of this because, we started the World Happiness Report in 2012. Founding editors were Richard, John Halliwell, Jeffrey Sachs. I joined the next year onwards with chapter contributions and then as editorial later on. But you realize some marketing agency, the math on this, it touches 1 billion people each year that directly or indirectly know about this or get to find out about this. And there's more than 1 million downloads, 10,000 news articles each year. And so it shows you that this resonates, period.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to touch on health for a second. When like the whole like Aladdin thing where you have to make some wishes and you wish for things that have unexpected consequences, like you might wish to be famous and then it turns out you get that wish and it's a nightmare. like, or you wish to be rich and then you become unhappy. But I'll reveal a secret about me. When I blow out my birthday candles and they say make a wish, the only two things that I ever wish for is health and happiness, because I believe that they're the two that they can't have some kind of like crazy fable story that causes issues. But we love to have this conversation with everyone that we meet, which I think there's lots of evidence to answer it both ways, but I don't think there is an answer to this question. But I'm still going to ask you in case you've got it. But what comes first, health or happiness?
In our approach in the Wellbeing Science book, we do think that health is a critical, hugely important, both physical and mental, not to forget, driver of well-being, of quality of life. So your quality of life as you experience it or as you reflect on it, life evaluation through the life satisfaction rate, is driven in no small part by your health status, mental and physical. But also other things like economics, job, social life, much else. And so, and when you said, I'm wishing for health and happiness, then I think technically you could shorten that to happiness / well-being, because that subsumes good health. You would not be happy if your health is down the drain this year.
Yeah.
And so that's how we tend to think about it, that these are absolutely critical. They're also where you can leverage action. So if you're a policymaker, you want to invest in the NHS, and I'm pleased they're doing that. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because it will improve quality of life as people experience it, i.e. their happiness. And so in a way, and interestingly, actually, Matt, as I think about this, when you wish somebody a happy birthday, what do you wish them? A happy birthday, not a healthy and happy birthday, a happy birthday. And somehow, bizarrely, over the years of humanity, we sort of, when it really comes down to it, we wish each other to have a happy birthday, a happy life. And I think that means that we sort of naturally understand that that assumes that all the drivers, the determinants are in line to have you lead a happy life. But it's an outcome KPI, and the action of which this is below it with the drivers, which include health.
Yeah, I agree logically with everything. However is, and this comes through painful experience, I know of people that I would call friends that have a limited amount of time left in their lives, and they know, and they've been told by doctors, and I would say through personal experience, at least one of them, once they had that news that their life only had a year to go, they're actually the happiest that I've ever experienced them. So that's where I think this conversation goes on and on and on. And I think when I spoke to that person at a football match recently, they said to me, because I've stopped worrying about all the stuff that doesn't matter. So I think there's another human condition element to this, but I think I might ask you this question every year and see as that question evolves. So
no, Matt, but you raise a good point. Now, obviously, like philosophers tend to do, they look for sort of these marginal, quite extreme cases to try and prove the theory wrong. I think probably generally I would stick with what I've said, but I can't imagine that there's situations or contexts like, sadly, situations where suddenly you only have a year left to live. So health is meant to be down, so you're probably going through cancer treatment. But somehow it makes you see the world in a different way. No longer think about the little things in life that are otherwise worrying you and depressing, and instead focus on those things that really matter. So I'm with you. That I think although it kind of goes counter this point though, but I was thinking in the direction of in policy, we now suggest to optimize policy, you're not just optimizing on well-being, you're including life years within that. So the notion of well-being years or well-being adjusted life years starts going in the direction of travel that you put us on, which is it combines sort of happiness, well-being measurement with length of life, which is obviously associated with health. And so as a policymaker, you want people to live the longest possible lives with the best possible quality of life. Absolutely. So quantity and quality. So I think that goes in that direction. So of what you're hinting at.
Yeah, and this is just, I just love the conversation. Like even when my dad, and this, if anything comes of this webinar, if if you're a man and you're feeling any problems to do with your health and you think it might be prostate cancer, to go and get checked. Because my dad went and got checked early, where some of his friends didn't, and they're not with us anymore. But my experience of having to go into hospital where people are at end of life was actually, as someone who was at end of life, it did reframe things in my mind. It did. I came out thinking, I wish everyone in the world could go here and see people that are at end of life, because I think it would reframe. However, I'm sidetracking us.
No, but Matt, it's a good point,
Yeah.
because a lot of the more positive psychology interventions from our friends in the United States, especially people like Cassie Mogul-Holmes, Elizabeth Dunn, Sonia Lyubomirsky, that's the kind of interventions they suggest. So think end of life. Imagine you're at your own funeral, even. And what are people saying? And what would you like them to say? And that's sort of reverse engineer from there.
Yeah, that's an incredible point. We've got so much stuff to get through in only half an hour. I just want to touch on this bit here, wellbeing, science and policy. And I just wanted to touch on Lord Richard Layard just quickly. I saw he did a speech in the Lords recently, which I think was shared by the social channels for your unit, Jan. I just wanted to, what I found fascinating about his talk, so he was talking about well-being in schools and the importance of it. And please go and check it out and watch it. I found it quite emotional to watch as a parent, and I'd recommend everyone to watch it. Just one personal question on Richard, Jan. In your opinion, some of these subjects can get quite politicized quite quickly. But Richard seemed, I don't know if it's just his personality or the way he presents information or his calmness, but the way that he delivers stuff, it's just so like non-political that it just sounds like such a good idea. And like, I feel like he's the type of person that can get people to come together. And even in his speech, he talks about cross-party collaboration. In your experience of working with Richard, am I just imagining that, or is that a skill that he has? And if he has that skill, is there anything the rest of us can learn from that skill? Because that's society all over at the moment. There's lots of polarization, and it's about bringing people together. Is that just can you just talk us through if he has that skill, and if he does, what we can learn from it?
Absolutely, Matt. And I think the beauty of Richard is it's the outcome that matters, and whomever can deliver on improving lives of people, leveraging well-being metrics, whether they're left, right, or center, he will work with them for the benefit of the outcome. So he is totally not politicized. He doesn't think in terms of political parties or allegiance to Labour or Tories or Lib Dems. He will just focus on trying to get things done for people in schools, or improving access to psychological therapies, which is now called talking therapies, et cetera, et cetera. And he got this through and stayed with it from the original Labour government that invested in improving access to psychological therapies, through the Conservative decade, onto now obviously back to Labour. So you spotted something really powerful, is that if you're focused on well-being as such, and the outcome, that's the end goal, and the means, whichever party, and you don't speak in terms of sort of kowtowing to a specific party. Now, the good news, and I should tell you, we are, and again, thanks to Richard's efforts, reviving the all-party parliamentary group on well-being economics. And in fact, this coming week, it will likely be announced alongside the UK Wellbeing report in the House of Lords. And so that's a huge thing. But also, Matt, allows me to say something more broadly, which is, I know we're in an age where there's political polarization. Especially from the from the United States, we've got this wind blowing against DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, anything that is considered woke, quote unquote. My real hope is that, and it should be really, is that well-being stays above the fray. Does not get engaged with this woke, anti-woke. And I think there's a good chance they won't, because whether you're left, right, conservative, progressive, liberal, whatever, MAGA, American style, or more Bernie Sanders, everybody cares about how other people feel and are made to feel. from different angles, but they ultimately care about being happy and whether you're left or right or center. That, in addition to that, I think, and Matt, you've spoken a lot about this as well, is the fact that our work within the complex of workplace well-being, linking it to business performance and productivity, and the strong causal evidence on this front by now, I think also takes it beyond sort of like a values-based approach. It's good for business. Taking care of people means taking care of business, period. And it's not sort of like an agenda around, okay, minorities need to be protected or this or not, except, et cetera, et cetera. And so I hope very much that the launch of an all-party parliamentary group is symbolic of the fact it's above parties. I hope that our work in terms of workplace well-being and the economics behind being so strong also keeps it above this notion of the polarized politics where people shouting left and right on this front, and make it less sort of a values, less of a values-driven approach, but just like a common sense approach.
I think the thing that I'm going to just summarize on that from your comments then is focusing on the actual goal and working with everyone that wants to help get to that goal. Would that be a fair summary on that, Jan?
Definitely on the Richard Laird front, absolutely focus on the outcome, which is the well-being of people, or generally we're in the context of schools, businesses, or policy, and then focus on that outcome, that goal, and whichever the means to get there are less important than getting there.
So, because we've touched on society a little bit, I just want to touch on gross national happiness quickly. So, for those who don't know, if you go and look up Bhutan, have a look at what they've been doing. Great thoughts on there. I'm going to put a quote from a leader of a country, but I'm not going to say who they are because I don't want it to get politicized. But this is from quite a while ago. But GDP measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. Which some people know who that quote is. I'm not going to say who it's from, but I think that is. I can't. Every thought that I have in this area comes back to GDP for me, because like when I sit there and I think, right, if let's say one of us became prime minister tomorrow, lots of the things that we would want to do don't necessarily raise taxes, and in some cases may reduce tax and GDP at a starting point. So if you think non-political, you'd be voted out really quickly if you did some of the things that take time. So if you look at the FTSE 100, lots of those organizations in there could potentially become more green to help well-being, as an example. But if you crash the FTSE 100 overnight, you might have chaos, et cetera, et cetera. So where I'm sort of going with this, Jacinda Ardern talked about a new kind of index to measure what a successful company is, and talked about having different factors in there. So there's one extreme of gross national happiness, there's gross domestic product. Where would you sit on that, Jan, in terms of if we could tomorrow get rid of GDP or upgrade GDP to be a slightly different metric? What would be your thoughts on that if you were advising a government on that?
It's more than a theoretical construct. I'm part of the UN expert group on wellbeing measurement, which was set up last year through the UN Statistical Division at the request of all statistical agencies. And there's now a high-level expert group commissioned by the UN Secretary General, which has started last month, looking at this in much more detail. But truth be told, this debate and this discussion, development of beyond GDP sort of indicators and dashboards has been going on for a while. And I think most notably, the launch of the World Happiness Report back in 2012 was part of a UN General Assembly resolution proposed by our friends at Bhutan, which was then unanimously voted in by all UNGA members, all the world's countries, to think beyond GDP and complement, not replace, complement GDP with well-being metrics. And so ever since, there's been lots of initiatives on this front. I think the most high-profile ones would be the Human Development Index, run by the UN Development Program, which is essentially a combination, I think, of health, income, and education. And those three big ones. So that's that sort of extends, if you will, GDP. Then there's the OECD has a Better Lives Index, which is also a combination, which extends it quite a bit further, and I think brings in life satisfaction as well. It's one of 11 dimensions. Our friends in Bhutan, the previous king, obviously gross national happiness, but be mindful, the GNH is 9 dimensions, of which sort of psychological art kind of stuff is only 1 dimension, and the other ones are spirituality, economic, material living conditions, health, education. So it's kudos to them. It's sort of like an SDGs avant la lettre that they started way back. But I think, as I've been arguing within the UN expert group on well-being measurement, and I think with some success, is that if we want sort of an equivalent to GDP or a complement or potentially even replace GDP one day, we need something that catches on. Because with all the respect to all the amazing dashboards out there with 9 dimensions or 11 dimensions or 3 dimensions, and God knows how many KPIs below that, or indicators below it, they've never really caught on with neither policymakers or individuals in the street. What has caught on is, you will have guessed it, the World Happiness Report. Why? Because it's simple. It's something that resonates with people. It's their happiness. And the measure is as basic as it gets. It's that one single item. People think it's some complex index, but no. Despite a bunch of academics behind it, it's really just, we just represent the average response to the question, how satisfied are you with your life these days? Or the country-letter variant of it, to be precise. And so I think it's the radical simplicity, it resonates with people. So I think my hope is that the next evolution, that's what I'm pushing for, of the sort of beyond GDP indicators is not another dashboard of which there's already a gazillion, but it's essentially a dashboard with a structure where you put the life satisfaction element sort of like as the KPI or the umbrella notion on top of the others. So think of these Sustainable Development Goals. There's, I guess, 17 of them, although some more relevant than others. But SDG 3, I believe, is health and well-being. So my suggestion would be is stick with the 17 SDGs, but leverage out of SDG 3 health and well-being and put the well-being sort of on top, so that you have sort of like an overarching criterion into which SDG 1, 2, 3 health, 4, 5, 6, and 7 sort of feed into. So you've got an overarching sense of like, is humanity actually moving along in the right direction? And the reason why that's important is just like GDP, people know that if there's GDP growth, so the UK economy grows by 2% this year, they know that all other things being equal, that's a good thing. It means we become richer, it means we can do more, we can invest more, etc. And so right now, if you look at the SDG indices or the human development indicators, you don't actually know what's going on because some indicators may have come up, some indicators may have come down, but how are we doing generally? Are we actually improving population well-being around the world? There's no answer to it unless, of course, you have that ultimate KPI, as we would argue, around life satisfaction up front, which then also resonates. Now, obviously, for policy making, you need more complexity, you need more indicators and measures and elements and dimensions of subjective well-being. But I think for like, and by the way, GDP also is a very complex set of national income accounts, but it comes out with one number that is relevant to people that they can understand. And I think we need something similar. So we need a complex set of well-being accounts, but on top, we need that one number that is not just an average of some kind of a gazillion indices coming together in a number that doesn't resonate and doesn't mean anything. But we need one basic number that's sort of like the figurehead for, are we actually doing better? And I think the World Happiness Report has shown that that is the way to go, that works, and it's there. And I would say, let's develop that measure and put indices behind it that then, so the equivalent of national income accounts, but that are a bit more broader. So those are the discussions taking place as we speak, really.
I love that. And I also love the thought. I love the thought of in the future turning on the news, and these have been the things that people are been having really serious conversations about. And I also just have this thought in my head without even mentioning politics. I love the thought of Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump getting really competitive about who has the best well-being in their country. Like, could you think about if we be a bit John Lennon for a second, wouldn't
exactly. So where's the highest life satisfaction? That would be the question to me. So where's the best place to live? Period.
Yeah.
GDP plays an important role, but it's not the proxy for that.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on a little bit from this book, and we're going to move on a little bit to the latest book, which Why Workplace Wellbeing Matters. So we're going to go into a little bit more into my field of the workplace section of this. And I think it goes back to even like how you described it, we spend so much time at work, don't we? And even in here, you shared a table around how related to some of the research we just touched on, which is only in this piece of study here, only it only sits above being sick on a matrix of things that make us unhappy. And the fact that work and study sits so low in the way that people think is such a shame and such a disaster. But we know there are so many outliers out there. There are so many people that enjoy their careers and they get so much out of it. And I saw an interview with Ashley Friedline, who is an entrepreneur in the UK and is an investor in the Happiness Index. And we do measure work-life balance in the Happiness Index, but he was talking about why he doesn't like the phrase work-life balance. And he was saying that so many people assume that home is the good bit and work is the bad bit, whereas it doesn't have to be that way. And I would say anyone that's if you're trying to narrow down and trying to get into the work bit, please start with this book. The bit that I just want to touch on today, because we've only got 18 minutes, which is very topical to our listeners, is the business case for happiness. So in it, you tackle that towards the end, actually. And I just wanted to talk about some of the studies that are in there. Were the studies, because you've obviously tried to keep this book quite concise. I always love asking, were there some gems in here that you couldn't include, that you had to take out, that you want to share? Yeah.
That is such a good question. There's one element within the link between employee well-being and productivity at the individual level that I don't think we were able to emphasize enough in the book, and I think it's so important. And we also didn't emphasize enough in the future work chapter, whereas we should have. Which is it was the big study in partnership with BT, which took us 10 years. BT being British Telecom, where for the first time in the field, we've been able to nail causality. Now, obviously, the idea that a happy worker is more productive has been part of management methodology for ages, and we all feel that's right. But to actually show it is very difficult, because there's reverse causality in academic language. The chicken and egg problem. Is it because work is going well that you feel good, or is it because you feel good that work is going well? We were able to disentangle that for the BT call center employees by leveraging weather differences around these call centers. So it's a long story. But the thing is, the outcome is, the result is the headline result is well known, and we discussed, which is sort of there's a 12% increase in weekly sales in function of how they feel from one week to another, and that's sort of a causal estimate. However, what we don't emphasize enough is that the effect size is a lot. It varies very much with the type of sales they do, the type of activities they do. And so the 12% is just the average effect of feeling good. So the 12% increase in weekly sales is just an average effect of feeling better this week as compared to the previous week. But the reality is, there were 3 types of activities that these people did. And the lowest order activities were just order taking. Literally people calling in from another country, and you had to take orders. So something that didn't require social or emotional intelligence. And truth be told, Matt, how people felt, these workers, it didn't impact their elements of the work, the productivity around just basic order taking. However, if it was the higher order task, which would be a disgruntled customer calls in, you have to retain their business or try and sell a complex package, there the effect of how they felt that week was much bigger than 12%, more like 20-25% impact on weekly sales for those kinds of sales that require essentially social and emotional intelligence. So I think, especially in the context of the future of work, where what's going to be left for humans to do once ChatGPT and other automation takes over, are the kinds of tasks that require social and emotional intelligence. Actually, the study is so old, it's 10 years old now. I'm sure that the order taking types of tasks are already taken out in the context of BT. And so that effect size that we identified as the first causal field evidence is a lower bound estimate. I think in the future of work and as we move along, the effect of how we feel on our performance is just going to become more and more important, because the types of tasks we do are the ones requiring social and emotional intelligence. and those get activated more if we're in a good state ourselves to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think that's an element that we didn't emphasize enough.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I think on that task element, which I think there's definitely loads of, if someone's like looking for a PhD to do, I think the linking of accuracy of task to some of the other research out there, because Professor Jeremy Dawson, who did that study in the NHS where they talked about staff satisfaction and mortality rates in the NHS, there is so much in that study to do with accuracy of task that in terms of follow-up, because there is so much known, but there's still so much unknown around like the subconscious, how we, like what we always talk about it, like when you just feel a bit meh and you just don't do the thing that you're doing as well as you could, but you're not consciously trying to be rubbish at it. You're just not feeling it. I think everyone listening, and I think we could admit that we've both been in that situation. Everyone has been in that situation, so they understand the feeling. But I think as more research comes out, I think that's where it starts to open up and realize that people in really serious jobs, their performance can still drop, and it can impact outcomes. But I still don't think it's a conscious thing, because if you take the NHS, if you take out the people that may be incompetent doctors or incompetent nurses and so on, I still think it's a subconscious thing where people are just not engaged in their work as well as they could be, and you're just seeing that over macro data over time. Yeah, you obviously touched on Alex Edmonds's work. I'll just read it out, this point in here, which it's been well quoted before, but I think it's a great one to come back to. Ultimately, he found that they had 2.3% to 3.8% higher annual stock returns. And he found that in his study by looking at best places to work lists. Did you find when you saw that study yourself, because I think you've worked with Alex in the past as well, or collaborated, was there anything you found interesting in that in that study at all?
Yes, absolutely. And so in a way, Alex's brilliant work from, I think about 2012 when he started on this, we've extended and developed that, of course, inspired by him, with the larger data sets that we have thanks to Indeed. And so it's worthwhile spending a minute on, if you don't mind.
Yes, please. That was
it also reminds you of what Alex did, but also how we've extended it and the results we find, which are really staggering. So Alex looks at the great places to work list, which comes out. The problem there, of course, is you're looking at a sort of a self-selected list to some extent, because people apply to be on this list. They submit material, mostly from the HR function. Whereas obviously what we're looking at is much larger. We look at all listed companies, or about 1,800 to be more precise, listed on the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. And we don't look at sort of self-submitted files of people reporting that their people are doing well. We look at from the horse's mouth. We actually have the crowdsourced data from all these companies, comparing like for like how satisfied they are with their job, whether they're happy at work, etc. And all of this is done thanks to Indeed, the world's largest job search platform, which nudges people towards the survey, which we then get to leverage. And we're now at such a scale with over 25 million or so people having, and actually counting. I think we're reaching 30 million at this point. So we've got, for all these big American companies, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of responses. And so that obviously then led us to think, oh, wait a second, can we update and develop Alex's work by looking at all these listed companies, and then essentially having what Alex kind of did, a very basic portfolio analysis of, well, if you take, so we have these 1,800 or so listed companies, if you rank order them each year and just invest in the best companies, the best places to work for, but this time from a larger pool and from the horse's mouth type survey, then what would we find in terms of stock market? And so we've now been doing this since 2019, and the first full year is 2020. And what you find is, I think the precise numbers are the $1,000 that we invested back in January 1st, 2021, based off the historic 2020 data, which then only gets rejigged every year, just like Alex did. By now, I think our $1,000 is worth $1,600, whereas the S&P 500 and the Russell 3000 and the NASDAQ in this index would have given you $1,500. So we're like a full $100 above. So what is that? That's about 20% across 4 or 5 years. So actually, it's extraordinary, because you see what you're seeing here is a replication of what Alex did on more historical data using a different methodology. But if you look at the 20% difference in terms of return we've got over the past 4 or 5 years, guess what? Divide 20 by 5, and you're getting near the figure that you quoted right at the beginning, or 3.5% or so difference. So that's exciting stuff. And I think what it shows, which is what Alex so neatly coined, is that the stock market doesn't fully value the intangible of workplace well-being. And it doesn't fully, it doesn't have good data, it doesn't have good measures to capture in a like-for-like way how companies are doing, so they can rely on maybe Glassdoor ratings or now the Indeed public profiles on this front, or maybe their own custom ways of trying to measure how people feel at these organizations, to then influence that in their investment decisions, to see where do they allocate their portfolios. But they still, even then, even if they can try and put numbers on this, they'll still underestimate the importance of it. Something that you and I work day in, day out on. We know, and we have more with the best evidence, we're closer to the best evidence on this. But investors, the stock market doesn't quite fully understand as of yet, or fully capture, and underestimates the importance of how people feel in terms of how that cascades down to the bottom line and ultimately quarterly earnings results. So let me finish. I think what he did, Alex, which is brilliant, and it kind of shows you, sums it up nicely. What he finds is that companies that are great places to work for, subsequently, there's more earnings surprises, quarterly earnings surprises, than for companies that are just average or below average. And that tells you everything there is to know. It means that the stock market didn't quite capture or anticipate the positive spillover effects of greater well-being. And these run through productivity, recruitment, so you attract better talent to begin with, and you're retaining that talent for longer if you're a good workplace. And these things, not immediately, but over time, make their way onto the bottom line, which then leads to, hooray, earnings surprises.
For me, yeah, and this is the really exciting part, because this is where the dots start to be connected. And there's two words that I always talk about, which I try to make them not sound like aggressive, but the difference between ignorance and incompetence. And this can be in any leadership role. This could be someone picking stocks. So there is a point at which you can be ignorant to this information, isn't there? You may have gone at a training program as a leader. You may not be on training, and you have been taught the way to lead, or you've learned the way to lead. And at this point, you may not have read this research. You may not have looked into this. You may not have heard of any of these studies before. So you may be ignorant to this information. Now, where I think this is all going, and this is where I think hopefully eventually it influences country and policy as well, which is, in my opinion, and this sounds aggressive, it should get to the point where it becomes, that's an incompetence of leadership if you don't understand where the drivers sit on what drives performance. Because if you're a leader, I see there's three things in there. There's vision, values, and performance. Everything else is extra. And unless you are working hard on connecting them up, and this is why, I mean, I don't mean incompetence in the wrong word, but in the same way, if a tennis player didn't know how to hit a serve, or a footballer didn't know how to make a tackle, you would say, well, they're incompetent. They can't do that job. They're not elite level. So I think there's the business side of it which adopts it, but then I think hopefully that's where, for me, I get really excited about hearing these little where the dots connect. Is then hopefully this impacts society as well, because people go, oh, okay, let's get back to that question that Jan and Matt had about health and happiness. Let's get some data on that. So Jan, I was just trying to sum up a few points here. We've only got 5 more minutes of your time. Where are we going in the future? Like, what are the most important projects over the next couple of years? I think we must just remind everyone on. You mentioned about the different indices that people are looking on in the UN to try and build on or improve GDP as metrics. What are you, in your head, what are the big things in the next couple of years?
Oh, for well-being science more generally, or well-being impact. But I think you're right. So I think on the policy front is to convince high up, so the UN, the OECD, statistical agencies, the Office for National Statistics, and ultimately the Cabinet Office, the Treasury, to sort of operationalize well-being metrics. So we now have, in no small part, thanks to the Office for National Statistics, decent measurement of well-being more generally. So it's about operationalizing this into policy to improve lives effectively. And that's I think important, very much part of the Beyond GDP movement. But we're at a stage where we now need to operationalize this and implement it, and not just stick with nice words and slogans. So that, I think that's a very important element. I think there's no way around it. The future of work is something that we ought to be really invested in and somewhat worried about, because obviously the question, it's not, and most people tend to think, oh, but will there be jobs left? So the quantitative, so the labor supply, labor demand equation. But I think people like you and me, Matt, we should push also for not just the quantity, but the qualitative question, which we highlight in the book, of course, as well. Assuming that there will be jobs left, which in every industrial revolution, there has been, we've come out with a transition, yes, but as many jobs as before, and in fact, likely better jobs. And so if we assume that this will be the case again, which is always an assumption, then the question that is really important to you and me is, well, but what will the quality of those jobs be? Will the quality of the new types of jobs in the 21st century, will they be better? So will there be higher workplace well-being? And how are these innovations, automation, ChatGPT, etc., how are they undermining or enhancing the drivers of workplace well-being? So they tend to be good for flexibility. They might make the job more interesting, but they might undermine a sense of belonging, social capital, etc., etc., etc. And so I think those are big questions that people like you and I need to look at. So from the quantitative to the qualitative angle, and there's some real potential concerns. And so I think the gig economy was sort of like the front runner of this new revolution. So the likes people doing Uber, Deliveroo, and yes, more flexibility. They'll allows them to top up salaries or in a transition period to do something else. However, their manager is now an algorithmic platform, chasing them down. And so that the human element gets undermined, the social connections gets undermined, and you and I know just how important the social elements are within driving workplace well-being. So those are big questions, I think, that are being needing to be raised. And as people like you and me and people in the HR function need to think more carefully about these productivity enhancing tools that are now being introduced, what are they doing for workplace well-being? And might that counteract some of the productivity enhancing elements that they're hoping for? And how is this being rolled out, et cetera? So I'm a bit worried about that, is the honest truth.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points in summary, because you've got a student knocking on your door in 60 seconds. I think about that bit around society and jobs as well, because if you take in this country, take in the UK, someone that would divide opinion would be Margaret Thatcher, around closing of mines and all this kind of stuff. Most people now would say they wouldn't want their child to go and work in a coal mine, as an example, right? But the big thing that I think we face, building on what you were saying, is what happens to those communities and society areas in between that 20, 30, 40 year, because going back to the whole thing about you 15 years ago, work and life satisfaction are linked, and they are linked to how we have an identity in society. So I think those things are going to be the big things we're talking on. And I'd like to finish with a lyric. So I'm going to use the Manic Street Preachers. Are you aware of the Manic Street Preachers? A 90s indie band, Jan?
No.
So they had a great song out called "If You Tolerate This, Your Children Will Be Next." So I'm just going to finish on that. And I'm going to say, Jan, thank you so much for sharing everything. And I know you need to go. So on behalf of all the listeners, thanks for packing in so much into this.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you also for everything you do.
No worries. I'll see you in Oxford soon. Thanks, Jan.
You will. See you, Matt. Thank you.